Okay. Our guests are probably wondering why this map is up here. What we're trying to do is talk about the cities and towns of Israel to some degree. And my point was that Israel has, in a very small area, has a lot of changes in topography, a lot of changes in rainfall, which would affect what they could do with the land. So when Zebulun got their area, it was not the same type of land as the land of Judah, and that was not the same type of land as the land of Asher on the coast. And so I started off with the area that most people would be familiar with, which was Virginia, showing the different topographies in Virginia. And this is the types of crops that are grown in different parts of the state based on the soil. The rainfall is about the same in all parts of Virginia, but the soil is very different in different parts of the state. So based on the soil type more than the rainfall, it depends, helps them decide what they're going to grow. All right, this is a topographic map of Israel, and that's a map of the rainfall, the red being the lesser rainfall, the blue and the green being the greater rainfall. It ranges from about 3 or 4 inches per year in the south to up to about 30 inches a year in the north. So it really affects what they can do with the land. And that is the types of crops that they grow today on the different types of the land. But I want to go back to this one. All right. So they're coming into the promised land, and there are people already there, as you know. So I want to start out with, what does God tell them when they're coming into the land? What is his focus for them through Moses as they're coming to the land? So I want to start reading Deuteronomy Chapter 6. You know that Deuteronomy was the last words of Moses before the people entered the land. He was not allowed to enter the land, but the people did under Joshua. Okay, I want to read the whole chapter and pay attention to what he's saying. All right, Brian, we'll start with you and work our way around the room. Read 2 around.
Reading from Deuteronomy Chapter 6. Now these are the commandments, the statutes, and the judgments which the Lord your God commanded to teach you, that ye might do them in the land whither ye go to possess it, that thou mightest fear the Lord thy God, to keep all his statutes and his commandments, which I command thee, thou and thy son, and thy son's son, all the days of thy life, and that thy days may be prolonged.
Okay.
Hear therefore, O Israel, and observe to do it, that it may be well with thee, and that ye may increase mightily, as the Lord God of thy fathers hath promised thee, in the land that floweth with milk and honey. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God is one Lord, and thou shalt love the Lord thy God with all thine heart, and with all thy soul, and with all thy might.
And these words which I command thee this day shall be in thine heart, and thou shalt teach them diligently unto thy children, and shalt talk of them when thou sittest in thine house, and when thou walkest by the way, and when thou liest down, and when thou risest up. And thou shalt bind them for a sign upon thine hand, and they shall be as frontlets between thine eyes. And thou shalt write them upon the posts of thy house and on thy gates. And it shall be, when the Lord thy God shall have brought thee into the land which he sware unto thy fathers, to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob, to give thee great and goodly cities, which thou buildest not.
houses filled with all kinds of good things you did not provide, wells you did not dig, and vineyards and olive groves you did not plant. Then when you eat and are satisfied, be careful that you do not forget the Lord who brought you out of Egypt, out of the land of slavery. Fear the Lord your God, serve him in only, and take your oaths in his name. Do not follow other gods, the gods of the peoples around you. The Lord your God, who is among you, is a jealous God, and his anger will burn against you, and he will destroy you from the face of the land.
You shall not put the Lord your God to the test, as you tested him at Massah. You should diligently keep the commandments of the Lord your God, and his testimonies and his statutes which he has commanded you. You shall do what is right and good in the sight of the Lord, that it may be well with you, and that you may go in and possess the good land which the Lord swore to give to your fathers, by driving out all your enemies from before you, as the Lord has spoken. When your son asks you in time to come, saying, what do the testimonies and the statutes and the judgments mean, which the Lord our God commanded you?
Then you shall say to your son, we were Pharaoh's slaves in Egypt, and the Lord brought us out of Egypt with a mighty hand. And the Lord showed signs and wonders, great and grievous, against Egypt and against Pharaoh and all his household before our eyes. And he brought us out from there, that he might bring us in and give us the land which he swore to give to our fathers. And the Lord commanded us to do all these statutes, to fear the Lord our God for our good always, that he might preserve us alive as at this day. And it will be righteousness for us if we are careful to do all these commandments before the Lord our God as he has commanded us.
All right. As I brought out last week, God did not place the seed of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob in an isolated area. He put them in this area, and even before they got there, and it would continue after they got there, there were two main roads. One going up the coastline called the Way of the Sea, and that was a road that primarily went from Egypt to Turkey, where the Hittites were. Another was a road that went further in, and it was called the King's Highway. And that road went up and around and over to Mesopotamia. Both of these were heavily used for trade. And being available, they were also heavily used when armies wanted to come north or south and invade a northern or southern country. So just because the Israelites were there doesn't mean that all of a sudden these roads weren't going to be used anymore. They were going to continue to be used by the traders and sometimes by the armies. But notice, I'm going to point out some things that he did not tell them in Deuteronomy 6 that if we were in charge, we might have told them. All right, first thing, again, they were on the trade routes, the major trade routes of that part of the world. And he didn't say, take advantage of the opportunities for wealth that is afforded to you by being on the trade routes. He didn't say, when you see the armies of the north or of the south, and you see the armies of Egypt or the Hittites or the Babylonians or the Assyrians or anybody from that area come through, join yourselves with them. They're a strong army. You can do well by attaching yourselves to them. He didn't say to do that. He said they're going to experience cities already built, wells already dug, vineyards and olive trees already planted. And he says in verse 12 and 10 that these things could be a potential temptation for you. Yes, they're going to be nice that they're already there for you, but don't make them into a temptation. And they were not encouraged to fortify the key cities that they would have against these armies coming in from the north or to the south. They were also not encouraged here to pick a leader for the people, somebody who could be the head of the defensive forces. And they weren't encouraged to form a central government once they got into the land. What they were told to do was make sure that you and your house follow the ways of the Lord. Teach them to your children. Make sure you heed them yourselves. That was the number one thing that they're told to do here in Deuteronomy 6. Now, I was thinking about, okay, how could I approach the subject of the cities and towns of Israel? I have this nice book at home, which I really do like. It's called Reader's Digest Atlas of the Bible. It was given to me by my father's aunt probably 45 to 50 years ago. And I just started reading it. I really do like it. But the way it approaches the cities and towns of Israel is to talk about their effects on different battles. They really emphasize that this city was a key to protecting this area. This city was a key to protecting this area. So when we read of Solomon or one of the later kings building cities, keep in your minds that they were usually building them for defense. They would put a strong wall around them. They would put defensive weapons in them. That was their purpose of building cities. It wasn't just to be a place for wealth. They were primarily cities for defense. And I want you to go to a verse that's quite familiar to you. Next reader, go to Isaiah 55, verses 5 and 6.
Isaiah 55, 5 and 6.
Yes.
Surely you shall call a nation you do not know, and nations who do not know you shall run to you because of the Lord your God and the Holy One of Israel, for he has glorified you. Seek the Lord while he might be found. Call upon him while he is near.
All right, my fault. I wrote down 5 and 6, but I really want 8 and 9.
Do I forfeit my turn, or do I get to read the right one?
You can read the right one.
Okay, good. For my thoughts are not your thoughts, nor are your ways my ways, says the Lord. For as the heavens are higher than the earth, so are my ways higher than your ways, and my thoughts than your thoughts.
Okay. So, through the eyes of man, the important cities in the land would be the cities on the trade route, the capitals, the military centers, which they would fortify heavily. But God's view is not man's view. And in his mind, the important cities were the holy cities. And that's what he was focused on the country having. And he did that by picking 2 types of city plus a special city. He picked the city where he would place his name, and we went through several cities a couple weeks ago where the Ark of the Covenant rested in different parts of Israel's history. Gilgal, Mizpah, Shiloh, and finally Jerusalem. They weren't, I don't know if they were all cities where he would call his name, but there were cities where the Ark of the Covenant rested, and that was the key part of what he called his name. He also had 42 other cities for the Levites scattered throughout the land. Oh, I'm sorry, I jumped one. He had 6 cities of refuge, and he talked about those cities of refuge before they even got into the land. So if the next reader would go to Numbers 35, and hopefully I wrote it right down this time. Numbers 35, verses 6 through 8.
And among the cities which ye shall give unto the Levites, there shall be 6 cities for refuge, which ye shall appoint for the manslayer, that he may flee thither. And to them ye shall add 42 cities. So all the cities which ye shall give to the Levites shall be 48 cities, them shall ye give with their suburbs. And the cities which ye shall give shall be of the possession of the children of Israel. From them that have many ye shall give many, but from them that have few ye shall give few. Every one shall give of his cities unto the Levites, according to his inheritance which he inherited.
Okay, so you've got the 6 cities of refuge, and you got 42 other Levitical cities. The cities of refuge were for what? Persecution? All right, they had killed someone, but accidentally, not on purpose. It wouldn't do any good for a murderer to go to a city of refuge. But the one who killed somebody accidentally through a farming accident or whatever, they could go there and stay, but they had to stay there until the high priest died. But anyway, they were scattered throughout the land. There were 3 on the east side of the Jordan River and 3 on the west side of the Jordan River, so that theoretically it wouldn't take anybody too long to get to one who needed to get to one, because a lot of times when someone in the family died at your hand, their brother or relative would want to kill you. And the city of refuge prevented that from happening. Okay, so the other 42 cities for the Levites, what were they for? Well, just think, what was the purpose of the Levites? Why scatter the Levites throughout the whole land? Why not just have them in one central location, since they were priests and everything? They were what? Spiritual leaders, yes. So that people could, I think that a lot of times on the Sabbath day, that the people could go and hear the priests, the Levites, teach, is why they were scattered throughout the land. And as Mary read, the tribes with the bigger allotment had dedicated the most of their cities, more of their cities, to the Levites than the ones with fewer cities. All right. So God was focused on the spiritual welfare of the people. Well, what about the natural welfare of the people? How did he handle that? He gave them different lands. Like I said, they had different amounts of rainfall. It's not a complex answer. All right, he said, work the land, and I'll take care of you. I'll make sure you get the rainfall as long as you follow my ways. All right? Now, they were going to have foreigners, King James called them strangers in the land, because some of the foreigners had come with them from Egypt, and some they would encounter by all the traders going back and forth. Now, I sat down yesterday and wrote down all the references that had to do with how the strangers were to behave, the foreigners were to behave. And there was a lot of things that the foreigners were not allowed to do. For the large extent, they were going to have to follow the practices of the Israelites. They weren't just given freedom to do whatever they wanted to. If they were going to participate in the religious services of the Israelites, they had to follow the same rules as the Israelites. They weren't allowed to be priests. They weren't allowed to go near the tabernacle or later on the temple. They weren't allowed to offer their children to Molech. They had to keep the Sabbath day. They weren't allowed to do any work on the Day of Atonement. They were to keep themselves morally pure. They couldn't practice all the immorality that other nations around them did. On the positive side, the Israelites were to love them, to treat them with a lot of respect. And because they had been foreigners in the land of Egypt, they were also to leave gleanings on their grapevines, on their fig trees, in their fields, for the foreigner, for the widow, for the fatherless, that they could have something to eat. And the Israelites were to bring a tithe. Again, they weren't encouraged to set up a central government, but they were required to bring a tithe. A tithe is how much? A tenth of all they grew, all their herds, to the place where the place where the Lord would place His name. And every 3 years, that was every year, and every 3 years, they instead of bringing it there, they would keep it in the city or area where they were from, and the stranger, the foreigner, was allowed to eat of that food that had been brought to the place where they store the food. No, okay. I can answer that positively. No, they were not, because you remember a certain rule about animals killed, and a different standard applied to the Israelites and to the foreigners. Remember that one? Anybody remember that one? Ellen? They had to drain the blood. The foreigners had to do that too, I think. No, I'm trying to remember. Like I said, I looked up all the references. I'm trying to remember what it said about that subject. All right. Rob, I'm going to have to get back to you on that. I don't see it real readily. But what I was thinking about the animals was that if an animal died by itself, if it just died a natural death, the Israelites were not allowed to eat it, but they could sell it to a foreigner, and that would be all right for them to eat it. There was some other rules about eating. Yeah, what Adam said about an Israelite sold to a foreigner could be redeemed. They were not to eat the holy things. They weren't to put the holy anointing oil on a foreigner either. But the foreigners were, like the fatherless and the widows, they were treated with a lot of respect. Oh, okay, it says, somebody said about eating the blood. The foreigners were not allowed to eat the blood of an animal. They had to pour the blood out just like the Israelites did. Sure, yeah. And that person would have to be circumcised if they were male and to follow all the requirements of keeping the feast that the Israelites were required to do. The first 5 books don't go into that. I don't know what the story on that would be. No, don't be sorry. That's a good question. If I find something, I'll let you know. All right. All right, think for a minute. There would be this place where God would place his name, and it's generally thought that's where the Ark of the Covenant was. Now, all these Israelites were scattered throughout all the land. They weren't scattered, they had their tribal allotments. But how did God keep them thinking of themselves as a nation and not just as a local group? And I'll tell you, we follow the same thing today. Not heritage, no. Somebody said something over there. Betty, did you say something? The feast days, right. Yeah, I guess you better go get it. Okay, I repeat it, says right. They had feast days where they were required to come together to the place where the Lord would place his name. So you got all these people, and it wasn't easy for them to come to a feast day, particularly if they lived in the northern part of the country, because the place where the Lord would place his name would be Jerusalem. That's about where that 21 is. So they would give up weeks of time. The feasts were generally a week long, but they would give up probably another week to get down there and another week to get back. So they would really make effort and sacrifices to attend these feasts. But what was the advantages of coming together as a group, as a 12-tribe group? Why? How did that help them spiritually? Just like, all right, so elaborate a little bit. It is just like Bible schools. how does Bible schools help?
It's a family gathering, but also a gathering of families, you know, and it was all centered on worship of God and the things that God had given, and it's so beneficial for our children, and so we know that Bible schools are so important for us.
All right, now think. David was a man after God's own heart. He was not allowed to build the house of God, but he dedicated his last years to making that house the best house it could be. Now, what did he focus on to make that house the best house it could be? What? He focused on the worship. All right, now why was he totally focused on the worship and not focused on the structure? But he could still be the architect even if he didn't build it. Why didn't he focus on that part of it? All right, I will show you why. Go to 1 Chronicles 28. I'll get the right verse for you. All right, whoever's the next reader, this is David assembling the people, some of his last words, and I want you to start with verse 9 and read through verse 13 of 1 Chronicles 28.
And thou, Solomon, my son, know thou the God of thy father, and serve him with a perfect heart and with a willing mind. The Lord searches all hearts and understands all the imaginations of the thoughts. Thou seek him, he will be found of thee, but if thou forsake him, he will cast thee off forever. Take heed now, the Lord hath chosen thee to build an house for the sanctuary. Be strong and do it. Then David gave to Solomon his son the pattern of the porch, and of the houses thereof, and of the treasuries thereof, and of the upper chambers thereof, and of the inner parlors thereof, and of the place of the mercy seat, and the pattern of all that he had by the Spirit of the courts of the house of the Lord, and of the chambers round about, of the treasures of the house of God, and of the treasures of the dedicated things. Also for the courses of the priests and the Levites, and for all the work of the service of the house of the Lord, and for all the vessels of service in the house of the Lord.
All right, thank you. All right, so why wasn't he focused on the structure of the house?
Well, I would say to a point he was. I mean, reading here that he does focus on how you're going to design this house and how you're going to set it up. But if you mean that the last part of it, the courses for the priest, how they would be organized, function, and so forth, there, I mean, all of this it says in verse 12 he had by the Spirit.
That's what I wanted you to say.
And so, however you weighed out his focus right here, whether it's here or there or total, his focus is guided by the Spirit, and all that he does is directed by that. So, focusing on for lack of a better word, the ritual or the liturgy, if you will, of the temple service. And, I mean, this is God given through him And I think that, in essence, that probably is the most significant thing. The bricks and mortar are nice, but it's not the most significant thing, as we learn when Stephen is commenting on this whole thing, that what's important is the service.
Yeah. And maybe to a certain extent, the Spirit or God gave him the ideas of what to include as far as music and stuff goes, but certainly he gave him the pattern of the building, just like he gave him the pattern of the tabernacle, just like he gave the pattern for the temple that will be built in the future in Ezekiel. He gave the pattern for this building as well. So David didn't have to focus on that, but so David used his talents as a musician to make sure that the worship service, when people came down to the area, would be encouraging, uplifting, so that the people would want to do this year after year after year. All right, so, and that was successful. People did come to enjoy it. And maybe they enjoyed it more after they had been in exile and came back and they rebuilt the house and reinstituted the worship services. But we know that in the New Testament time, they would come from not just all parts of the land, but they come from a lot of different areas in the Roman Empire to these feasts. And so they really enjoyed being together in a world that was very much opposed to God's thoughts and God's ways. Yes, Walter.
So think of the temple as a body, organized in a certain way, where the mind will be a certain place, the hands are a certain place, each part functioning to give honor and glory to God. But what he wanted to show you, it's not so much how it was framed outwardly, but what was contained inside the mindset and the service that was there.
It's said that in the times of Jesus and the apostles, like 1 million people would come, 1 million Jews would come from all over the empire. I think the Passover is probably the primary feast that they like to come to, but I remember in the Pentecost in Acts 2, if you listen to where they say they were from and what tongues, what languages they heard the apostles speaking in, they're from all over the empire, not just Palestine, not just Israel. All right, Adam, when do you want me to quit? Now's a good time. Okay. But just remember, God's focus for the land was on the people worshiping him, not on how they appeared economically or how they appeared to their neighbors. He wanted them to be focused on him and his ways, and they would be light to those around them. We will, if you want to continue with this subject, we will talk about the idea of what cities were built for defense and all of that. But I want to focus first on what God was focused on, because as he said, my ways are not your ways. Thank you for listening.